Please join me in welcoming Mark and Criss to the Strand.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. David, how you doing? How are you?
Well, thanks for everybody for coming out. This is an exciting night as we are going to celebrate the release of Chris Schwartz's wonderful new book, Ruffhouse. Also celebrating this year the 30th anniversary of the formation of Ruffhouse Records, the label that brought Cypress Hill and the Fugees and many others to the national consciousness. As I believe was explained, Schoolie D was unable to make it. He came down with an illness and
Strep throat.
My guy here's got stories for days and days and days, so we don't have to worry about that. You want to just jump right into it, Chris?
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
So I think the best place to start is at the beginning. The beginning, at least, of music, all right? So I'm going to go back to the mid-1980s. You're out of the Navy with an honorable discharge.
Right.
And you're in Philadelphia and working for $120 a week at a place called Nicetown Records,
right.
Small R&B label. And you decide that you want to become Schoolie D's manager.
Right.
Which seems, on paper, strange bedfellows, right?
Yeah, I guess when you're looking at it, not for me at the time, but sure, yeah.
So Schoolie had been doing his thing independently, putting out records like Gangster Boogie, doing kind of his own thing.
Right.
And then one day, Chris, you knock on his door.
Right. I knock on his door. Well, I had talked to him a couple minutes before, and I introduced myself. I told him what I did. I gave him a little bit of my background. And I told him that I think that he should have his own record label. He should have his own, infrastructure. And I said I could help him do it. And he said, wonderful. I said, look, you want to meet? And he said, yes. We set up a time. And I went over to his house. I knocked on the door. He answered. And then he said, oh, I'm taking a shower. And he just shut the door. And I just stood there on his porch. I wasn't sure what to do, really. So I went back to, the record label I was working in was in a daycare center in West Philly. It was about 5 blocks away from Schoolie's house. So I went back. I called him up, and he said, "Talk to my lawyer." And I said, he said, "Warren Hamilton." And I said, "Okay, what's Warren's number?" But before I could actually get those words out of my mouth, he hung up. And it took me a couple tries. I got a meeting with Warren right away, and we had a couple misschedules, but finally the three of us got together. And I think when we sat down and I really went through the whole plan and what I could do to help him out is when he finally, he said, yeah, let's try this. And the first thing we did was we actually shot a video. And the guy who shot the video is sitting right there, Rich Murray.
How about that?
Rob.
So 1985.
Right.
You guys.
1985.
You start Schoolie D Records. This is before
Right.
Ruffhouse, before there even is an
Yes.
idea for Ruffhouse. And you put out the 12-inch PSK, What Does It Mean, in Gucci Time.
Right.
And these records, they became underground classics. They were sampled endlessly by a variety of artists, the Beastie Boys, Public Enemy, Snoop Dogg. They've been sampled hundreds of times. Influenced scores of rappers, Ice-T, all this stuff, right? So I was re-listening to these songs in preparation for the evening, and I was struck by one thing, in that these songs are over 6 minutes long. They're kind of like anti-radio songs.
Yeah, well, it's that's for clubs, You want to they're very long songs.
So, and
I was going to get into a big explanation.
Right, sure. So, I guess what I would like to know is, no one else was putting out any records anything like this at the time. They were very much their own thing. So can you kind of describe what it was like, that process of making those records with Schoolie, the collective vision that you had for them and what you wanted to achieve with those records?
Okay, yeah. Well, first, a lot of it was almost happenstance, and that was because we recorded these records in a little 8-track studio in Center City that was designed specifically for recording the Philadelphia Orchestra. So it was a little 8-track board, and there was no real outboard gear. And for folks who don't know, outboard gear is that in a recording studio, you have a console that has all the channels that you're mixing your music on. So you have your kick drum, snare, vocals, hi-hat, guitar, organ, so you run these channels through different effects processors, and that's how you create different textures in the music and everything. This studio had none of that stuff. It didn't have any effects or anything, but they did have a big plate reverb. And a plate reverb is it looks like something a piano would come in. It's a big wooden box, and inside of it is a huge spring. And what we did was, really what Schoolie did was he ran the kick drum and the hi-hat through this plate reverb, but he got it with as much reverb and echoing as possible, but then they gated it. So I'm giving a pretty sparse definition of it. You'd have to really listen to the record to understand what I'm talking about. But I could say this, that there was absolutely at the time no other record in the world sounded like this. And when it went out to clubs, it literally became it was like a virus. I mean, every DJ loved this record, and it actually enabled us to, we actually ended up doing the very first hip hop tour of the UK and Europe and Canada because of this record. So it was really exciting.
Well, that actually led to my next question. I was going to ask about that tour. So you went on tour in support of Big Audio Dynamite, which was Mick Jones from the Clash's band. And it's the first hip-hop tour of Europe. So I'm wondering what that experience was like and what you may have learned that informed future tours.
Yeah, in Scotland, they throw bottles and cans at you. So, it was... we would go and do shows with Big Audio Dynamite. Now... Mick Jones from Big Audio Dynamite was a big hip-hop fan, so it made sense for him to bring Schoolie along. And PSK, Gucci Time were now in the world of embryonic world of hip-hop, they were like anthems. So we would go to venues where there would be potentially 1,900, 2,100, 2,500 people there for Big Audio Dynamite, and maybe 17 of those people were there to see Schoolie D, or there were people who were interested in the hip-hop genre. So you have to imagine places like parts of Ireland and Scotland where you have a DJ and an MC, which was the traditional configuration for a hip-hop show at the time. And these are people that never heard hip-hop. They know nothing about it. So to them, it's like watching a spaceship landing in their backyard. It's funny. I take it for granted, now. At the time, I took it for granted because it would never occur to me how important it is what was happening at the time. And that was that we were bringing hip hop to places that have never had it before. And then after you want to talk about the next tour? Okay. So after the Big Audio Dynamite tour, we went back on a solo tour because by that time we had licensed the records to a company called Rhythm King. Rhythm King was part of a company called Mute, which was Daniel Miller. Daniel had groups like the Silicone Teens, Erasure, Depeche Mode. It was an independent company. And so Rhythm King allowed us to have, they advanced us the money so we could make the album, which was what we call the PSK album. So we went back on a Rhythm King tour, and the Rhythm King tour was, obviously, Schoolie D was the headliner. Then there was the Three Wise Men and the Cookie Crew. So this was now the first real official hip-hop tour, tour with the artists and the posters and coming to different cities. And the Beastie Boys Run DMC were about 5 weeks after us. But it was, again, it was very interesting because, people just were seeing it for the first time. And it was fun.
All right, so let's flash forward a few years. Schoolie signs his major label deal with Jive.
Right.
And you link up with Joe Nicolo, and you start Ruffhouse.
Right.
And so some of these early acts that you sign, like Chiba and Tim Dog and Larry Lar, they're good, but no big hit singles. Until Joe is on the West Coast one day for a job, and someone hands him a demo by a group that calls themselves Cypress Hill.
Right.
And, of course, you sign them, and originally, I guess you said to a singles deal, and then that becomes an album deal. You put out an album, and it just sits on a shelf and collects dust for a year.
It wasn't a year.
No?
No. It was like probably about, I'd say like 3 to 4 months, but that's a long time. That's a lifetime.
Right.
That's a lifetime. When
Sure.
you put out an album, a group new album, and it does nothing. I do remember we shipped somewhere in the low 30s, like it's probably like 32, 33,000 records. And we worked the singles and nothing was happening. There was like no penetration at retail whatsoever. And but the odd thing was that DJs were calling us, clubs and retailers, like the guys who spin records in the shows and the mix shows. Everybody was loving the record, but there was just no movement. The album was just not moving.
Until?
And the third single, B-side, got licensed in the movie Juice. And it was during the scene where Tupac Shakur's character is chasing Omar Epps' character through this party that was like in a loft. And the song played during that scene in the movie. And when you were in the movie theater, you could actually watch people. And nobody could sit still while that song was playing. And then the album was selling 50,000 copies a week.
All right, so how do you prepare yourself or deal with that kind of overnight success?
I mean, how do you prepare in what regard?
I mean, what did you guys do? How were you able to handle going from 0 to 50,000 copies overnight?
Gleefully.
Were there fulfillment issues?
That was just the thing. It was like we were just so thankful because when you have something that's so for us was just very, I almost want to say revolutionary in some regard because if you looked at hip hop at the time, there was nothing like Cypress Hill. There was absolutely nothing like it, and it everything about it. And it was one of those very rare occurrences where, and just talking about like the makeup of the group, it's a lot of people thought Cypress Hill, there was like four guys rapping in the group when there was 2. Muggs, the DJ / producer, had this incredible ability to find these just really great records and just make these loops and these breaks and these beats and everything. And then Be Real and Sen both had these very kind of like unique vocalizations that they would do, and they would change it up too. Like Sen did like almost like 3 different kinds of voices, and Be Real did a couple different kinds of voices, and it was just this whole sonic landscape. It was like really interesting. And then what they were talking about was awesome too. And they had all these double entendres. And then wrap that all up with Joey doing his like bombastic mix, and then everything that he has been his whole discipline and everything he's done over the years of all the records with Schoolie D, with the Hilltop Hustlers and everything, and it was just it's a great record. Nothing else like it. And we were just overjoyed.
The next big success for the label was with a group called Criss Cross.
Right.
A couple of adolescent rappers out of Atlanta who like to wear their clothes backwards. The success of their singles Jump and Warm It Up had kids all over the country losing their minds and wearing their clothes backwards to school, and it was a whole ordeal. It was kind of a cultural phenomenon. In the book, you talk about how You were at a diner, I think, with your wife.
Right.
And you heard like a middle-aged couple talking about the song, and you said to yourself, "Oh, this is going to be a big record."
Yeah, I was really hungover that day, and my wife was not happy with me because I was hungover, and we were I need to back up a little bit because it won't make any sense. So we had shot the video. Rich Murray over here had shot the video in Atlanta, and I think the video was like $21,000, which at the time was considered a very low video budget, especially when you looked at the video that we got. But the song had not been on the radio yet. It had not been released. Nothing had happened with this record yet. And Rosie Perez, the actress, was the talent coordinator for a television show in Living Color with the Wayans and Jim Carrey and everything. So as a favor to the publicity staff at Columbia Records, she had booked Criss Cross on that show. So they had performed on the show the night before. Prior to this, when we signed the group, I thought we were doing something else. They had a song called Little Boys in the Hood. And Little Boys in the Hood was a song about two kids kind of taking an introspective look at how they were going to decide what they wanted to do in life. Did they want to follow the examples by their like drug dealers and the guys with the cars and the cash and everything, or did they want to go to school and pursue other things? So that's what that song was, and that's kind of like where I thought this whole thing was going. And it started as a singles deal, then it became an EP. And the song Jump didn't happen till much later in the production. So when we shot the video, had all that stuff lined up, the next day after the In Living Color performance, I was in the diner, and there was a older couple sitting catty corner to us. And while my wife was yelling at me, I was listening to this guy, and he was talking about Criss Cross, and he just kept going on and on and on about how phenomenal this group was, everything. And I just thought, I said, I think this record's going to be really big. I think this record's going to, explode. And it actually, it turned out to be the fastest selling rap album in the history of Billboard. It was so big at one point, I could get in my car and I could find it on any one of 3 stations. I could just flip between the 3 stations and find the songs playing.
It was a huge album. So every label exec has the stories of the one that got away or the ones that got away. And Ruffhouse is no exception, I imagine. So in the book you describe having signed very early in their careers both DMX and
Right.
Nas to singles deals and releasing both artists' debut singles. Yet for various reasons, neither artist stayed with the Ruffhouse long term. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like working with these artists so young in their career before they really established themselves in the game and became the legends that they became? Anything you can tell me about? Maybe
I could speak more on Nas than I can DMX.
Okay.
Because the way DMX happened, we had a really great A&R guy with us. His name is Kurt Woodley, and Kurt was with Columbia. And Kurt was all about really credible music. And he had bought us the DMX record, and it was his project, and we had done the record, but I'll be honest, I wasn't really involved in it too much. And I think what happened, the record charted, it did real well, but by the time we got around to trying to figure out what to do to move on, that an option had lapsed, which was really surprising because we have checks and balances to make sure stuff like that happens. The Nas situation is completely different, though. There was a nightclub in Philadelphia called Revival, and I was a frequent patron of this nightclub, and the manager was a gentleman by the name of Greg McGarrah. Greg always used to play me this song called Live at the Barbecue. and it was on Wild Pitch Records. And on the song was a new artist named Nas. And Greg was always saying, you should really, try and find this kid and sign him because he's just absolutely awesome. And I didn't disagree. It's just that I kind of thought that, well, he's already signed to Wild Pitch, and so how am I going to make this happen? It's going to be really expensive and everything like that. And then it wasn't even 2 months later, I got a phone call from the president of Columbia Records, and he asked me if I wanted to take a meeting with MC Search of Third Base, and he said that he has a soundtrack project and some artists to talk about. And I said, that's great. And spoke to Search on the phone. He goes, yeah, I'm working with this artist named Nas. And I'm like, oh, Nas. Oh, wow. Awesome. Yeah, come on down. So they came down to Philadelphia with an A&R representative by the name of Faith Newman, who is a really great diversified background in hip-hop music. And she had worked for Def Jam, and, So they had come down, and we had lunch, and we talked about, doing this deal. It was a soundtrack deal. It's for a film called Zebrahead, starring Michael Rappaport. The subject matter of the film was, I guess for lack of a better way to say it, it was, hip-hop culture and how it was embraced by particular segments of, white kids. And so we did the soundtrack. We did the video for Nas. The song was called Halftime. It was like a $3,000 video, and the song came out. I think we charted like number 5 and number 7 for the song. And as we were getting ready for the album release, we had come to learn that there was an issue up at Columbia with Nas, and with Nas being on our label. And Joey and I had met with the president of Columbia, a gentleman by the name of Don Einer. And what we were told, what Donnie had told us was that he was in hot water with Sony corporate over the fact that Nas was introduced to our label by Sony, and he should have technically really been on Sony. But what it really was is that we had a lot of pipeline revenue in the record business. You could, whether you're an artist or a label, they don't have to pay you all your money at once. It's set up to where it's paid out over periods because there's returns and everything. And we had a pretty significant amount of pipeline revenue from Criss Cross and Cypress, obviously, and it could have been like millions of dollars. And so for them, I think the senior A&R staff at Columbia Records wasn't quite sure about Nas, and they weren't really sure what was going to happen with this artist. So in order to kind of, you run a corporation, it's all about managing risk. And so in a move to manage risk, what they did was that they told Search, well, yes, we will work with, you can sign Nas here, but it has to go through Ruffhouse. That way, if it's successful, Sony didn't have to spend a dime and they would have half the profits. If it wasn't successful, Ruffhouse would eat it all. So it was a good deal for them, except that the anticipation for the record was so overwhelming that, I think the whole thing kind of backfired on them. But we did a deal to have them buy us out of the contract, basically as a favor to the president of the company.
Okay, it just only ended up being the best rap album ever.
Yeah, I know.
So no discussion of Ruffhouse would be complete without talking about the phenomenal success of the Fugees and the solo projects of their individual members. One of those projects, of course, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, won 5 Grammy Awards, sold more than 20 million copies, pretty good. But now it's been 20 years since that album came out, and Lauryn Hill has not released another album. I do know that you're one of the few people in the industry that, she keeps close confidence with, and I just want to know if you have anything to share about, when we might be able to hear some new music from Ms. Hill.
Absolutely. She is finishing up they're doing a reimagined Miseducation record right now, and just about all of it is done except for a couple tracks. And then there's a whole other project happening. It's going to be a documentary film, and it's going to be a new album, a new LP.
Any idea when that might hit the streets?
Probably by this time next year.
I'm going to hold you to that, Criss.
Yeah.
Woman has
No,
a lot.
I can tell you, it's definitely in the works.
Woman has a lot of fans.
Yeah.
A lot of fans. I hope that you and also the audience will indulge me on this next question. I know I'm about to fanboy out a little bit here. I think you suspect what I might be asking you. So 6 months after the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill will snatch up all the Grammys, you put out one of the weirdest and most wonderful albums of the 90s, Kool Keith's Black Elvis Lost in Space record.
Yes, you are a fan.
The album was only a modest success compared to obviously what Cypress and Lauryn and the Fugees were doing, but it is the only album in his vast discography that ever charted.
Right.
So including Dr. Octagon. So I was just wondering if you could spend a minute and tell us a little bit how that record came to be and what it was like to work with such an enigmatic genius like Keith.
Well, the reason we ended up doing that record is because we wanted to do Dr. Octagon. Dr. Octagon for me is probably one of my, if I had to do like a top 10 desert island, right, of hip hop records, Dr. Octagon, I think, is probably one of the most genius, innovative hip hop records I've ever heard.
Agreed.
Yeah. And I did everything I could to make that deal work. The biggest problem I had was that Sony just really they just weren't feeling it, and their big thing is that they didn't know where to market it. And I said, you don't need to know where to market it. It has its own market. The market's there. You just don't, But it came down, it's a classic thing. It's like, is it for the, the black music department kids? Is something they, and I was very, very, very disappointed that we didn't get that record. And it ended up on I think an independent label in Los Angeles, and then DreamWorks picked it up.
Mo-Wax.
Yeah. Then DreamWorks, and then I know it had gone through a couple different, I've seen it in different, packaging and everything like that. But, it's probably, in terms of hip hop albums where he is talking, the artist is talking that amalgamation of science fiction and pornography, right? It's the Citizen Kane of that category.
No arguments. And so Lost in Space, Black Elvis?
Yeah, Black Elvis, Lost in Space. That was sort of our consolation, was that we ended up doing, signing Keith to make that record.
Okay, so now we're here in 2019, and 35 years later, you are working with Schoolie D again.
Yes, I am.
And This is his first new album in, 10 years?
Yes.
And it has a collaboration on it with Ice-T.
Right.
All right.
Right.
And I did hear a few of the tracks that you were gracious enough to share with me. It definitely returns to that kind of, that stripped down 808 influence kind of sound. So can you talk to me about what it's like being back in the studio with Schoolie after all these years?
Oh, it's awesome. Awesome. As a matter of fact, we mixed a record with Joey's twin brother, Phil, who is just as capable in engineering. He's got the same kind of production, intuition as Joey does. But we used it was all done with like kind of a 80s style production elements, and if you're familiar with Schoolie's records, you had the first record, the PSK Gucci Time, then Saturday Night. This record sounds like it should have been the third record.
All right. Well, to paraphrase Schoolie, I'm looking at my Gucci. It's about that time. We should open it up to some questions from the audience, if anybody has any.
Raise your hand. I'll bring you a mic. Bonus points for going first in my book. It's always tough.
Don't all jump up at once.
I got one. you said Dr. Octagon is Desert Island Disc 1 of 10. You don't have to do 10. Just what are some other ones on that list?
Would be it's going to seem really bad because I'm going to talk about some of my own records. So I would say there is probably Zappa Live at the Roxy would be one. One Size Fits All. Miseducation. First two Schoolies. That's a tough one, because I think if it ever actually happened, I would be getting some compilations, yeah. But those are some records.
You need a desert island that has electricity to play your turntable.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's all. Oh, here we go.
So what is to come next, Mr. Schwartz?
We have we have a new record label. It's called Rough Nation, and we have a couple artists from Philadelphia. Actually, no, I'm sorry. 2 artists from Philadelphia, 1 from New Jersey. We have an artist from South Philly named Flowski, who is right now probably the hottest hip-hop artist in Philadelphia, hands down. And we have a group from New Jersey called No Facade. It's there's 15 members in the group. And there's some other artists that we're looking at, but they're doing a reality television show they're going to start filming, I think, this Thursday. And I'm doing a podcast called Rough Nation with Univision. And I think that's
You're staying busy.
much, yeah.
Yes.
What made you decide to write the book?
People have been asking me to do it for a long time, and it just always seemed too soon. Even, 10, 15 years after the fact, I felt that it just all seemed too recent, And so, and also, I think there was a couple things that, the NWA biopic, the documentaries that are coming out, and I kind of feel that it was right because it seems that there's a bit of a resurgence in the 80s and 90s hip hop. So I thought it'd be a good time as any.
Well, the book is terrific, and I hope everybody enjoys it. And thanks to you all for coming out. And Criss will be signing copies over here at the table.
Thank you both so much for being with us. Please give them a round of applause for Criss and Mark.
Thank you.